We are good to start.
Okay, I think that's my cue then. We just received the message to get started. Let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge Olanian. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen, and remember to keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates as well as myself. Do the attorneys want to make appearances?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Brennan Bartley. I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Ms. Rebecca Nguyen.
Good morning.
And today we represent the plaintiff in this case, Ms. Stevie Rogers.
Good morning.
Hello, Ms. Rogers.
After the defense has had a chance to state their appearances, we have a few pretrial matters we'd like to discuss.
Okay, defense, I'll hear from you.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Madeline Driscoll, and along with my co-counsel, Matt Bestman.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
We represent the defendant in today's case, Ms. Drew Mars.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Ms. Mars.
Your Honor, at this time, may we address those pretrial matters?
Yes, please do.
First, we'd like to invoke Midland's Rules of Evidence 603 and 615, which constructively swear in and sequester all witnesses barring parties and party representatives.
Is there any objection by the defense?
No, Your Honor, we would just like to note that Drew Mars will be present for her trial today.
Of course.
And similarly, Your Honor, our party, Ms. Stevie Rogers, will be present throughout today's trial.
Understood.
Next, we'd like to ask that all objection arguments requiring offers of proof be heard constructively in a sidebar outside of the earshot of the jury.
Any objection by the defense?
No objection, Your Honor. I apologize.
No worries. Go ahead.
Lastly, we'd like the court to note that evidence exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted and no further foundation is necessary.
Is that the defense's understanding as well?
Yes, that's our understanding of the pretrial order.
It's fine.
With that, we're ready to proceed with opening statements.
Is there anything further from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, just one thing. Because of the nature of today's trial, we're going to be showing exhibits up on the screen. Would it be all right if we show those exhibits before they're admitted constructively outside of the view of the jury?
Yes, just make your adversary aware of what you'll be displaying, and that's fine.
Absolutely. Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to go.
Got it. So I have another script that I'm supposed to say. We will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they're in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. Let me do that as well. And with that, the plaintiff can go ahead if they would like to make an opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. One moment just so I can position myself.
That's perfectly fine.
And before I begin, Your Honor, can you hear me all right?
I can.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. She had to do something before she lost everything. August 14th, 2018. It's a cool summer's night right here in Midlands. And an old lakeside mansion tucked away in the very outskirts of the city. This defendant, Drew Mars, is pacing. Her breaths are heavy. Her heart is pounding in her chest. Her hands are shaking so badly she nearly spills the bottle of bright purple pills she's holding. But she knows what she needs to do. She has to do something before she loses everything. So she makes her way into the master bedroom. Next to a small bed, there's a nightstand with one thing on, a pill organizer. The defendant takes 2 pills from that organizer and switches them with 2 bright purple pills that would kill her victim. And just like that, the defendant earns a fortune. Because today you'll learn that the owner of that mansion, the person who slept in that bedroom, was none other than the Agatha Lee, one of the best-selling authors in American history. And the defendant we just heard about, Drew Mars, Agatha Lee's trusted nurse of 10 years and the sole beneficiary to Miss Lee's will. Today you're going to learn that the very next day, Agatha Lee was found dead in her bedroom. The chemical in those pills found in her system. And within a week, this defendant inherits her lakeside mansion, all future royalties from Agatha Lee's writing, and nearly $20 million in cash. She had to do something before she lost everything. Now, to understand the defendant's actions, we have to go back to the year before Agatha Lee's death. At that time, Agatha Lee was 82 years old and relied on her nurse, Drew Mars, to take care of her. As thanks, she decides to leave everything she owned to the defendant. Now, if today's story ended right then and there, there'd be no need for us to come into trial today. But that's not the case. Because today, you're going to learn that in the summer of 2018, Agatha Lee reunited with her only living family, her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, who you'll actually get the chance to meet today. Rogers, she's going to take that stand and she's going to tell you how the two reconnected, about the countless hours they spent together. And how on August 14th, the day before Miss Lee's death, Agatha Lee sat her granddaughter down and told her about her plans to draft a new will. One that would leave everything she owned to Stevie Rogers. There's just one problem. The evidence will show that this defendant heard every word of that conversation. The evidence will show that the defendant knew she had to do something before she lost everything. Before Agatha Lee even had a chance to finalize that will, you're going to hear from Miss Rogers today that she saw Drew Mars making her way into her grandmother's bedroom. The next day, Agatha Lee was found dead. That's why the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers, has brought a suit against Drew Mars. Here in Midlands, there's this law called the Slayer Statute. And what this law says is that when someone causes the death of another person, they can't benefit from their estate or benefit from their will. Today, it's our burden to prove to you that it's more likely than not that this defendant knowingly or purposely caused the death of Agatha Lee. And we'll meet our burden by showing you 3 things. What the defendant knew, what she did, and what she left behind. So first, let's talk about what she knew. Today, you're going to hear that the defendant knew that every night, Agatha Lee took 2 bright purple pills of arthritis medication. But not only did the defendant know what medicine Agatha Lee needed to take, she also knew what medicine would take for life. A drug called chloroandrine, which you will learn looks identical to Miss Lee's arthritis pills. And second, what the defendant did. The defendant switched Agatha Lee's pills, her prescription pills, with a drug she knew would kill her. Today, you're going to hear about a toxicology report that will prove exactly that. Agatha Lee died from taking 2 chloroandrine pills. And third, what the defendant left behind. Today, you're also going to hear about a bag filled with the same drugs that killed Agatha Lee. And that bag, you're going to learn that was found in the defendant's bedroom with the defendant's own fingerprints on it. The evidence will show that the defendant had to do something before she lost everything. That's why, at the end of this trial, we're going to ask you to honor Agatha Lee's wishes, to make sure that the product of her life's work ends up back in the hands of her family, not her killer. My co-counsel, Brennan Bartley, will come before you and ask that you find this defendant liable for Agatha Lee's death. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Does the defense wish to make the statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
When you're ready.
May it please the court. Look a little closer. It's August 15th, 2018. Drew Mars, a live-in caretaker for an elderly woman named Agatha Lee, wakes up early. She starts her day just like any other. Goes for a walk, makes a cup of tea, and then goes upstairs to wake up Miss Lee. She knocks on the bedroom door, expecting to be greeted with a big smile, good morning, Drew, just like every other morning, but, well, on that morning, nothing. Drew starts to worry. She walks into the bedroom and she sees Agatha Lee lying lifeless in her bed. Drew calls her name, she shakes her shoulders, but Miss Lee won't wake up. She's not breathing. There's no pulse. Drew Mars breaks down in tears. She rushes to find Stevie Rogers, Miss Lee's granddaughter. She says, your grandmother's not waking up. Can you please help me? Miss Rogers doesn't call an ambulance. You'll learn she calls the police. Just moments after finding out that her grandmother passed away, Miss Rogers says, Drew Mars murdered my grandmother. Members of the jury, that's what Miss Nguyen just told you. She stood before you and she accused Drew Mars of killing Agatha Lee. She told you all about a lethal drug and a $20 million payout, but members of the jury, when you look a little closer, you'll see that Miss Nguyen left out the most important part of that story. You'll see there's another person who had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit this crime. When you look a little closer, you'll see it was Stevie Rogers, not Drew Mars, who killed Agatha Lee. You see, just 6 months before Miss Lee died, she disinherited Stevie Rogers. Instead of leaving that $20 million estate to her granddaughter, well, Miss Lee decided to leave it to Drew Mars instead. So Miss Rogers came up with a plan. You learn she knew Drew Mars handled all of her grandmother's medication. You learn she knew her grandmother was fatally allergic to a drug called chlorantranine. So Miss Rogers knew that if she poisoned her grandmother, well, it would look like Drew Mars had done it. And on August 15th, 2018, Miss Rogers put that plan into action. You learn she waited until she was the only person at home. She snuck up to her grandmother's bedroom and replaced one of her regular medicines with a dose of that lethal drug. You'll learn Miss Rogers hired a private investigator to pin the blame on Drew Mars, and the final step of that plan, well, that's why we're here today. Stevie Rogers has sued Drew Mars under what's called the Slayer statute. Well, this means that she must prove, by a preponderance of the evidence, that Drew Mars knowingly or purposefully caused Agatha Lee's death. Well, if she meets this burden, Drew Mars won't get that $20 million. No, that money will go to Stevie Rogers instead. But Miss Rogers won't be able to meet her burden today, members of the jury. Because despite what she wants you to think, well, Drew Mars is not to blame for Agatha Lee's death. And you'll actually get a chance to meet Miss Mars today. When you do, you'll see she's not the malicious, manipulative person Miss Rogers wants you to think she is. You'll see she was a loving caretaker who would have done anything for Agatha Lee. She'll tell you how on the day Miss Lee died, she overheard a conversation between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers. Miss Mars will tell you how she heard Stevie Rogers begging for that $20 million inheritance. And you'll also hear from a man named Brian Cabrera. That's Agatha Lee's biographer and friend. Mr. Cabrera spent the 6 months before Miss Lee's death interviewing her day in and day out. He served as her confidant for those 6 months. Mr. Cabrera's testimony today will show that it's Stevie Rogers' story that the evidence does not support. No, it's Drew Mars's story that the evidence supports. Members of the jury, what happened to Agatha Lee on August 15th is a tragedy. But Drew Mars didn't kill her. And when you look a little closer at the plaintiff's case today, you'll see that's true. You'll see that in order to manipulate a narrative in which she receives that $20 million, Stevie Rogers will have to ask you to ignore evidence. You'll see the holes in her story. That's why at the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to find in favor of Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Before we move on to the plaintiff's witnesses, first, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that all loss is at 1:08 p.m. and I'll give the judges just a moment to score. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'll ask that everyone switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witness at the same time. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed with its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning. Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Good morning. My name is Stevie Rogers.
What do you do for a living, Miss Rogers?
I'm a writer. I used to be a novelist writing murder mysteries, but I'm transitioning to journalism, war journalism, given my background.
What exactly is your background?
Kind of a complicated question, but I won't bore you. My dad, he's Lebanese and my mom's American, but I was born and raised in Beirut, in Lebanon.
Let's talk about today's case, Miss Rogers. Can you tell us why you're here today?
Sure. I filed a lawsuit against Drew because I believe she had something to do with my grandmother's death, and I don't believe that it's right for her to benefit from it.
Miss Rogers, you just mentioned a couple of people. I want to ask you about them. Your grandmother that you just mentioned, who is she?
Agatha Lee, the writer.
And when you said the name Drew, are you referring to the defendant, Drew Mars?
Yes, exactly.
And you also said that you don't believe the defendant should benefit from your grandmother's death. What exactly do you mean by that?
After my grandmother died, Drew inherited everything.
Do you know if your grandmother had a will?
Yes, she had two, actually.
Would you recognize those wills if I showed you those wills in court today?
Yes.
Your Honor, may my co-counsel publish exhibits 9 and 8 for the members of the jury to see?
Your Honor, I just ask that opposing counsel enter those documents to evidence before she publishes them to the members of the jury.
I agree.
Yes, of course. Just so Ms. Rogers can see and identify them.
That's perfectly fine.
So, Ms. Rogers, do you recognize this?
Yes, this is the will my grandmother made in 2008.
And if we can look at the next exhibit. And what is this one?
This is the will that she made in 2018.
Do both of these wills look like the last time you saw them?
Yes.
Would you say they're a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff enters exhibit 8 and 9 into evidence.
Defense?
Without objection, Your Honor.
They're both in.
You can take those down now, Mr. Bartley. Now, Ms. Rogers, I want to talk to you about the first will, the one you said that was created in 2008. What's your understanding of what would happen, or what would you inherit from this will?
I would be the sole beneficiary, so I would inherit everything.
Now let's talk about the second will, the one made in 2018. What's your understanding of what would happen if your grandmother died after this will was created?
Drew would inherit everything.
Now, Ms. Rogers, there's a 10-year period in between these wills. What was your relationship like with your grandmother during this time?
It changed. You know, before me and my grandmother, we were very close. You know, we were the most alike in the family, but in my early 20s, both my parents died, and I didn't know how to deal with their loss. I isolated myself from my friends, from my family, including my grandma, and I didn't really talk to her for so many years. Yes, I'm ashamed to say that we didn't talk for so many years.
Even though the two of you didn't talk for so many years, did you ever have a chance to reconnect?
Yes, we did.
When was that?
I went to visit her in July of 2018. That's concerning. Sorry. In July of
No worries, Ms. Rogers.
2018.
How was it when you first visited her?
You know, I have to admit, it was a little bit awkward at first, but after a while, it was like no time had passed. You know, we were watching movies together, playing games together, you know, Twisted, and her solving her little murder mysteries that she would write. It was amazing.
Now, Ms. Rogers, I want to move on and talk to you about the last time you saw your grandmother. What day was that?
It was August 14th, the day she died.
Now, on that day, did you ever talk about your grandmother's will with her?
Yes.
What happened during this conversation?
We were walking on the grounds outside for a bit, and then she told me to come into her office. She sat me down. Her eyes got watery, and she held my hands and she said, "Stevie, I love you so much. I want you to follow your dreams. I want to make these opportunities happen for you. I want to leave everything to you. I was,
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay, specifically to the statement, "I want to leave everything to you."
Counsel, I'll hear you.
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, are you referring to me or my opposing? Okay, yes, Your Honor. This is an exception to hearsay per Rule 8033, as Agatha Lee is currently telling Miss Rogers during this conversation about her plans to leave everything in her will to her. This is an exception to hearsay, Your Honor.
I'll hear
Response, Your Honor?
you. Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, the witness didn't testify that Agatha Lee mentioned any sort of plan. What her specific words were, "I want to leave everything to you." That's not a plan, and because of that, it doesn't fall under Rule 8033.
I'll give you the last word, Ms. Nguyen.
Yes, Your Honor. In addition to plan, we would also argue this is the witness's, or rather Agatha Lee's intent, her intent to leave everything in her will to her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers. This is still an exception to hearsay, Your Honor.
I'm gonna let it in, overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Rogers, were you finished with your answer?
I think I was just saying how touched I was and how much it meant to me. Yeah, but that's all.
Now, after this conversation you had with your grandmother, did the topic of her will ever came up again?
No, she died the next day.
Let's talk about why. Were the two of you alone during this conversation?
Kind of, yes.
Miss Rogers, what do you mean by kind of?
I mean, we were the only two people in the room at that time, but when we went outside, I saw Drew with her ear on the wall. It looked like she was listening on the conversation.
When you saw the defendant with her ear against the wall, did you see how she reacted?
Yes, at first, she was startled that we came out of the room, and then after my grandma, she went to get her jacket. Drew acted weird with me a little.
What do you mean by weird?
Her face started to get red. Her eyes, were like squinty like this, and she mouthed at me. She said, "No way."
Miss Rogers, I now want to talk to you about what the defendant knew before your grandmother died. Do you know what types of things she would do for your grandmother as her nurse?
Yes, I mean, she cooked, she cleaned, she prepared grandma's medicine, things like that.
You mentioned your grandmother took medicine. Do you know what type of medicine she was taking?
Not really, no.
Did you and Drew Mars ever discuss your grandmother's medicine?
Not particularly, but there was once that she mentioned grandma had an allergy to a medication.
Do you know what that medication is called?
Chlororandromine.
Do you know what chlorandramine looks like?
Not really, no.
And when did the defendant bring up this drug that your grandmother was allergic to?
It must have been like 1 week before she died, early August.
Now, Ms. Rogers, I want to talk to you about what the defendant did the night your grandmother died. Did you see her that day?
I saw her that night, yes.
What was she doing?
Well, I was going downstairs and I hear something, so I look behind me and I see Drew coming out of her room, going to grandma's room, holding something.
What time was it when you saw the defendant making her way to your grandmother's bedroom?
9:35, 9:40, something like that.
Now, when you saw the defendant doing this, what did you do?
Nothing really, I wish I thought about doing something, but I didn't. I did nothing.
What happened the next day?
I was in my room, I was sleeping, and Drew comes, she knocks on my door, And she says that grandma isn't breathing.
How did you react?
I ran to grandma's room. I checked her pulse. I shook her awake, but she wasn't answering. And I told Drew, do something, do CPR, do something. I called 911, but it was too late. She was gone.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Just give the witness one moment.
Absolutely.
When you're ready.
Good morning, Ms. Rogers.
Good morning.
I want to start by talking about why you're here today, okay?
Sure.
And like you told us on direct examination, according to your grandmother's most recent will, she planned to leave everything to Drew Mars, right?
Yes.
That was her mansion, right?
Yes, her mansion, $20 million, her book royalties, everything she had, basically.
That's right. Your grandmother planned to leave her $20 million to Drew Mars, right?
Exactly, yes.
Now today you're suing Drew Mars, right?
Yes.
Under the Slayer statute.
Yes.
And you believe that if you win this case, Drew Mars won't get that $20 million, right?
Yes, exactly.
You believe if you prove Drew Mars killed your grandmother, will you get that money instead, right?
That's what would happen, yes.
So let's talk a little bit about money. Like you told us on direct examination, your parents died back in 2008, correct?
Yeah.
They left you a $2 million trust fund, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Oh, I apologize. They left you a $2 million trust fund?
Yes, they did.
Well, Ms. Rogers, you lived off of that money for 10 years, right?
Yes, I still live off of that money.
And like you told us on direct examination, you didn't speak to your grandma much in those 10 years, right?
I'm ashamed to say that, no, we didn't have much contact at all.
For 7 of those 10 years, you didn't visit her one time, true?
No, you're right. I'm so sorry, you're right.
Oh, and 7 years after you saw your grandmother, you first saw her again in July of 2018, correct?
Yes, July 4th. That was the 10th anniversary of my parents' death.
So let's talk about the timing of when you decided to see your grandmother for the first time in 7 years. You told us on direct examination that your grandmother sent you a letter in February of 2018, right?
No, I didn't.
Objection, Your Honor, misstates testimony, if I may be heard.
I think the witness can clarify.
Yes,
and
Your Honor.
Feel free to re-object.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, your grandmother sent you a letter in February of 2018, true?
That is true, yes.
That's when you found out she disinherited you, right?
That's what she
Objection,
said.
Your Honor, hearsay.
Explain.
Response?
Let me hear from Ms. Nguyen first, and then I'll hear a response.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel just referred to the contents of a letter that Agatha Lee sent to Stevie Rogers. This is an out-of-court statement being used for the truth of the matter asserted, and it's hearsay.
And I'll hear you, Ms. Driscoll.
Yes, Your Honor, we're not actually using these statements for their truth value. Now it's actually on the record in that will that opposing counsel entered into evidence herself that Ms. Rogers was disinherited. What we're using this testimony for is the effect on the listener. That it wasn't until after she found out she was disinherited that she decided to visit her grandmother for the first time in 7 years.
Let me make sure I'm clear. Is the statement that you're using from the exhibit that's in evidence?
Your Honor, the truth value of the statement is that Stevie
Answer my question. Is the statement that you're using from the exhibit that's in evidence one of those wills?
Your Honor, it's not a specific statement. It was the general perception that she got from that letter, that she had been disinherited.
Okay. Ms.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll just mentioned earlier during her argument or during her questioning that Ms. Rogers was told from this letter that she was disinherited. Well, we have no issues with Ms. Driscoll asking this witness about the wills, which we did mention on direct examination. We mentioned nothing about the letter, and Ms. Driscoll is saying that she's only using this for the effect on the listener, and it's our good faith belief she is alleging the effect is that this letter is what prompted this witness to then go visit her grandmother. However, if I make an offer of proof.
Sure.
This letter was received by Stevie Rogers on February 5th, 2018, but she doesn't visit her grandmother until almost 5 months later on July 4th, 2018. We believe that opposing counsel will not be able to lay the foundation that this letter directly prompted this witness to go visit her grandmother. So she cannot lay the foundation that that is the effect on the listener.
That sounds like a weight argument, so I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, you found out from that letter you received that you had been disinherited, right?
Yes.
And then a few months later, in June of 2018, your $2 million trust fund started to run dry, right?
Yes, I had invested all the cash into assets. You're right.
So it was after your trust fund started to run dry and after you found out you had been disinherited that you decided to visit your grandmother for the first time in 7 years, true?
Yes, it was after, but I have to clarify that was not the reason.
Ms. Rogers, when you arrived at your grandmother's mansion in July of 2018, you weren't the only person living there, right?
No, Drew lived there as well.
That's right, Drew Mars, your grandmother's caretaker, true?
Yes.
And like you told us on direct examination, you know that Drew Mars handled all of your grandmother's medications, right?
Yes, exactly.
She refilled your grandmother's pill organizer every single Saturday. You saw her do that, right?
I didn't watch her do it, but I know that's what she did. It was part of her job, yes.
Ms. Rogers, you know your grandmother took those pills every single night, right?
Yes.
And like you also told us on direct examination, your grandmother was fatally allergic to a drug called chlorandramine, right?
Yes, that's what Drew said. You're right.
You know that this drug was available over the counter, right?
I believe she mentioned that too, yes.
You were aware you could buy it at any pharmacy at any time, right?
Sure, yes.
Ms. Rogers, you said that the reason you knew about chlorandramine was because of Drew Mars, but you actually read about that drug somewhere else too, right?
I think grandma's book that she wrote, Death in a Bottle, also had references to this drug. So I've heard it from then too.
That's exactly right. You know that chlorandramine was a major plot point in your grandmother's book, Death in a Bottle, right?
Yes.
You know that the plot of this book involved a wealthy person being poisoned with chlorandramine, right?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance as well as 403, substantially more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard? Oh, sorry, Your Honor, you were muted. Oh, okay, yes. Your Honor, in regards to my relevance objection, Mr. School is currently questioning this witness about the fictional novel that Agatha Lee wrote 50 years before her death. Any testimony gathered from this book is not relevant. It doesn't make any fact in this case more or less likely. All the information in this book, we have no idea if it's real or not because it's a fictional novel. And then in regards to the 403 objection, substantially more prejudicial than it is probative. If there is any probative value to this book, once again, because none of the information in this book can be verified as it's a fictional murder mystery novel, this is substantially more prejudicial than it is probative.
Counsel, Ms. Driscoll?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, this line of questioning is relevant. It's the defense's theory in today's case that Stevie Rogers framed Drew Mars for her grandmother's murder. Now, if I may proffer, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
The witness will testify that the plot of this book involves a wealthy elderly person being poisoned with chlorandramine. The caretaker of that wealthy person is accused of the crime. Now, it's our contention in today's case that this is where Stevie Rogers got the idea for her plan from. It goes to her knowledge, it goes to her intent in today's case. That's why this testimony is relevant. And pursuant to opposing counsel's 403 objection, now the plot of this book is actually already contained within a pre-admitted document. That's Exhibit 7, a Wikipedia entry about the book. The members of the jury are already going to have the evidence about what this book is about. Therefore, talking about this evidence on this cross-examination is not going to substantially prejudice the members of the jury. They're already aware of that evidence.
Ms. Nguyen,
Response, Your Honor.
will you just let me know, is the plot of the novel or the book, is that contained within an exhibit that was entered into evidence already?
So one of the pre-admitted pieces of evidence, one of the 1 through 7 that Mr. Bartley mentioned during pretrial, it does include a Wikipedia page that details some of the larger plot points of this book. However, the issue that we have with Ms. Driscoll cross-examining this witness on it in regards to the 403 objection is that it's one thing to talk about the plot or have the members of the jury have access to this plot, but it's another thing for Ms. Driscoll to try to link it to the event of today's case. Once again, this is a fictional novel. We have no idea if any of these facts in this book are true or not. So to say that it has any probative value in today's case is substantially more prejudicial than it is probative.
I'll give you the last word, Ms. Driscoll.
Yes, Your Honor. The probative value of this testimony is that it goes to Stevie Rogers' plan. Now, opposing counsel can feel free to redirect on this point if they wish to ask Ms. Rogers whether or not this had any bearing. However, the argument that this goes to Stevie Rogers' plan is probative to the defense's theory in today's case. And it's not unfairly prejudicial, certainly not substantially unfairly prejudicial, considering the fact that the members of the jury will already have the plot of this book before them when they go back to deliberate. It's admissible.
That's sufficient. The objection's overruled. You can continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, you're aware that in your grandmother's book, Death in a Bottle, an elderly, wealthy person is poisoned with chlorandramine, right?
Yes.
You're aware that the accused person in that book is the caretaker, right?
Yes, in the book, she was the one who committed the crime, yes.
And you started reading this book in July of 2018, right?
Yes, that's right.
A month later, your grandmother, a wealthy elderly person, was poisoned with chlorandramine, right?
Yes, by the caretaker. Funny how history repeats itself sometimes.
That's right. You accused your grandmother's caretaker, right?
Yes, I did.
So let's talk about what you were doing on the day your grandmother died, okay?
Sure.
And that was August 14th, 2018, right?
Yes.
Now, on that day, for a few hours in the afternoon, your grandmother went out to lunch, right?
Yes, she did.
Drew Mars wasn't home either, right?
Yes.
So for a...
Oh, sorry. I didn't.
No, were you finished? Go ahead and finish your answer, Ms. Rogers.
I was just going to say that Drew took grandma to her lunch.
That's right. So for a few hours in the afternoon on August 14th, you were alone in Lee Manor, right?
Yes, I had Pepper with me, but yes, I was alone.
During those few hours, you had access to your grandmother's bedroom, right?
She has a lock on her door. I don't know if her door was locked, so I don't think I can answer the question.
You had access to Drew Mars's bedroom, didn't you?
She might have a lock. I don't know. I didn't check. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, actually, Ms. Rogers, you know for a fact that the only lock in that house is on your grandmother's bedroom door, right?
The only door that I'm aware of that has a lock is Grandma's room. But like I said, I haven't checked the other rooms. I don't know if they have locks.
So if Drew Mars's room didn't have a lock on it, you would have access to that room, right?
Sure, that makes sense, yes.
You would have access to the closet that's inside of her room, right?
Again, yes, if it wasn't locked or anything, then you're right, yes.
If Drew Mars's door wasn't locked, well, if you wanted to, you could have gone in and put a black bag in her closet, couldn't you?
Sure, if her door wasn't locked, if her closet wasn't locked, and if I wanted to, then yes, you're right, ma'am.
Ms. Rogers, the next morning you woke up around 8:30 a.m., right?
Yes,
You woke up to Drew Mars pounding on your door, true?
yes,
She said your grandmother isn't waking up, right?
yes,
So of course you went to your grandmother's bedroom, right?
I ran.
When you got there, well, you didn't see any blood on the floor, did you?
No,
There was no bruising on your grandmother's body?
no,
You didn't see any signs of a struggle, did you?
no,
In fact, Miss Rogers, you would say your grandmother looked like she was sleeping, right?
yes,
She was 82 when she died.
she was.
So, Miss Rogers, let's get this straight. An 82-year-old woman dies, looks like she's sleeping, there's no sign of a struggle, and your first thought was, this has to be a murder?
Ma'am, I don't think you understand. My grandma was so active, so lively. So for her to, die out of the blue, it didn't make sense. It had to be something else. I couldn't believe that she just died out of nowhere.
So, Miss Rogers, that's a yes to my question. There was no sign of a struggle, and your first thought was, this has to be murder.
Yes.
You called the police, right?
Yes, I called 911 when she wasn't breathing, when she wasn't waking up.
You told the police someone killed my grandmother.
Yes.
About an hour later, the police arrived, right?
Yes.
You spoke with Detective Nora Kong, right?
Yes, that's her.
She was the lead investigator in the case.
Yes.
Detective Khan said, I don't know why I'm here, right?
Yeah, she said it looks like just the old lady died in her sleep. And I told her then, you don't know my grandma. You have to run all the tests. You have to search the whole house.
That's exactly right, Miss Rogers. Detective Khan said an old lady died in her sleep, but you demanded an autopsy, right?
Yes, I wanted to know if anything had happened to my grandma. It didn't make any sense.
You were certain your grandmother had been poisoned, right?
Yes, I thought that what it was, because you're right, there was no blood, there was nothing, so it must have been poison.
Miss Rogers, you were so certain that your grandmother had been poisoned that you filed this lawsuit before the results of that autopsy ever came back. Isn't that true?
Yes, I couldn't wait.
You were so sure what those results would show because you already knew what they would show, right?
Yes, I mean, that was the only solution, that was the only, possibility that I could think of,
So that's a yes to my question. You already knew what those results would show.
Yes, it was the only thing that made sense.
But Miss Rogers, you didn't trust the police to blame Drew Mars for that murder, right?
I don't know what you mean, ma'am.
You didn't trust the police to get this case right, did you?
I thought it would be, I would like to say yes, I trust the police, but they've made mistakes in the past, so I wasn't going to leave it to chance.
Miss Rogers, in your own words, you didn't trust the police to get this case right. That's a yes?
Yes, you're right.
You weren't paying the police, were you?
No, I don't know what you mean. I would never bribe anyone or anything like that, if that's what you're saying.
Well, you're saying you would never bribe anyone, but you were paying someone else in this case, right?
I never bribed a single person. Where is this coming from? I never bribed anyone.
You paid a private investigator named Mr. Bond, right?
Yes, ma'am, I paid him for his services, but that's not a bribe.
You paid Mr. Bond $25,000, true?
Yes.
And on
No,
August 22nd, 2018, your hired investigator accused Drew Mars of murder. That's true.
yes.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed.
Now, Miss Rogers, when you first saw your grandmother the day after she died, why did you think it was murder?
Because, like Miss Driscoll said, there was no blood, there was no bruising. She was a healthy lady. You know, she exercised every morning. She did aerobics every morning. It didn't make any sense. That was the only thing I could think of.
Now, Miss Driscoll also asked you about a book that your grandmother wrote. Did anything in that book mention whether Agatha Lee was allergic to chlorantramine?
No, it was a fictional book. I only knew that because Drew said it to me.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor. Barring recross, may this witness be excused?
Is there going to be recross?
No, Your Honor, no recross.
The witness is excused. I'll give the judges just a moment to finish their ballots. And when the plaintiff is ready, please call your next witness.
Your Honor, would you like me to continue waiting for the judges or to call my next witness now?
Please call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Detective Mark Bond to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hey, sure. Good morning. How you doing? Name's Mark Bond.
Where are you from, Mr. Bond?
I grew up about 10 minutes out of downtown Philly. I was born and raised there, but I moved to Midlands a few years ago.
What brought you to Midlands?
Well, coming out of college, I figured I had two choices. I could move out on my own and get a job, or I could move back home with my parents. It was an easy choice for me. My parents, they said no. So I moved out here, started working.
What exactly do you do for a living now?
I'm a private investigator. You see, I take a look at the facts, no biases, no judgment. That's what I do. I bring the truth to the people of Midlands.
And about how long have you been a private investigator?
I've been doing it for years. I've seen all kinds of things. You might have heard in my last work, it was an investigation into the corruption of the Public Irrigation Commission. I called it, I don't give a damn.
Well, sir, I want to talk to you about this case specifically. How'd you come to be involved in this case?
I was hired by Miss Stevie Rogers a few times to look into a few things for her.
What was the first of those times?
That was in June 2018. She calls me up, tells me her grandmother's missing. So I looked into it. I found her for her.
And what about the second of those times?
It was August 15th, 2018. She calls me up, tells me her grandmother's gone. At first I'm thinking, dear Lord, how many times can you lose the same woman? Turns out she meant she was dead. I came out the Midlands as soon as I could.
I want to talk about what happened when you did come out to the scene. What exactly was going on when you arrived?
I showed up to Lee Manor about 9:30, right before the cops got there. I went upstairs. I see Miss Rogers, Miss Mars, and I see Miss Lee too. She wasn't breathing.
What did you do next?
I started searching. I started looking around the house on the second floor, trying to see if I could, dig up some truth.
Did you ever find anything during this search?
I did, yeah. I was looking all over the second floor and I get to Miss Mars's room. So, I goes inside, I sees a laptop, and that's when I find this email she sent to one of her friends.
Do you think you'd recognize that email if I showed it to you in court today?
I'm sure I would, yeah.
Your Honor, at this time, permission to display what's been marked for identification purposes only as Exhibit 13, a copy of an email, for the moment just to yourself, Mr. Bond, and Mr. Besman.
That's fine.
Detective Bond, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, sir. This is the email I found on Miss Mars's computer. This is the picture I took of it.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of the photograph you took?
It looks the same to me.
At this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Defense?
No objection, Your Honor.
It's in without objection.
So, Detective Bond, can you tell us what we're looking at here? Why'd you take a photograph of this email?
Well, you can see here at the top of the email, it said it's from Mars to one of her friends. They's talking about the will. Mars says she knew she was getting everything from the will. She was going to be getting millions of dollars. This was totally going to change her life.
Did Miss Mars ever say anything to you about the will?
Yes, sir, but she didn't say that. She told me, a few days later at the will reading that she had no idea, that she couldn't believe she was getting it.
Well, sir, with that in mind, I want to talk about exactly how Agatha Lee died. Do you know if an autopsy or toxicology screening was performed in this case?
I do, yeah. They was both done.
Do you know if anyone in this case requested that either of these be performed?
Yes, sir, Miss Rogers. After we found Miss Lee's body, Miss Rogers asked that an autopsy and a toxicology report be done.
Did the defendant request that either of those were done?
Not exactly, no. She asked for the body to be cremated right away.
If the body was cremated right away, would it have been possible to perform an autopsy or toxicology screening?
No, sir, that's not how it works.
Well, then, with the autopsy that was performed, are you familiar with the results?
I am, yeah.
So can you tell the members of the jury exactly how Agatha Lee died?
Sure. It said she died due to an allergic reaction to chlorandramine. It's this heartburn medication.
Did the defendant ever tell you what she knew about Agatha Lee's allergies?
Miss Maz told me that she knew that her grandmother was allergic to chlorandramine. That 2 pills of those could kill her.
Now, sir, can you tell us, what does a pill of chlorandramine look like?
I've taken them a few times myself. These small, round, purple pills. They've got no smell, no taste. It's like my mother's cooking.
Do you know if any chlorandramine pills were found at Lee Manor?
I do, yeah. I was there when we searched the whole house, and we found a bottle of pills in a small black bag.
Sir, do you think you might recognize a photograph of that black bag as you found it?
I'm sure I would, yeah.
At this time, Your Honor, permission to display what's been marked for identification purposes only as Exhibit 14, a photograph of a black bag in a closet.
That's fine.
Mr. Bond, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, sir. This is the photograph of that black bag. You can see it right there underneath the shirts and the blanket. That's the one we found the pills inside.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of this photograph?
Yes, sir. It looks the same to me.
This time, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 14 into evidence.
Defense?
No objection.
It's in without objection.
So, Mr. Bond, this black bag with the chlorandramine inside it, do you know if there was any forensic evidence found on that bag?
There was, yeah.
What sort of forensic evidence?
Well, we found a partial print on the back. We looked it over, and we found the partial print matching the Drew Myers on the zipper.
So this black bag with the chlorandrine pills inside it with the defendant's fingerprint on the zipper, can you tell the members of the jury where it was found?
We found both the black bag with Myers' print and the bottle of chlorandramine pills stashed inside Miss Myers' closet.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bond. Your Honor, nothing further at this time.
Defense, you could cross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, sir, I'd like to talk about how a normal investigation would typically go, all right?
Hey, let's do it.
In most murder investigations, it's the police who take the lead, right?
Sure.
The police are the ones collecting evidence.
Not all the time, no. Sometimes they hire people like me to come down and help them out.
Well, you know that when it's the police doing the work, they don't get paid by any of the subjects, right?
What do you mean?
Well, it would be highly improper for a police officer to take money from someone they were investigating, right?
Right, they's already getting paid.
Yeah, they get paid by the taxpayer.
That's right.
But your job is different.
Yes, sir.
You are being paid by one of the parties in this case.
Yes, sir. I was hired by Miss Rogers.
That's right. Now, you told us on direct examination you've worked with Stevie Rogers in the past, true?
Right. In June of 2018, and then in August of 2018.
And before you ever started work on this case, that past relationship had already earned you $10,000 from the plaintiff.
Yes, sir. She hired me to find out where her grandmother was. I took the $10,000, searched up her address, and I found it.
Took $10,000 to search up an address?
Sir, that's just what I charge.
Now, you stand to make a lot more money than that today. Isn't that true?
No.
Well, you know that the plaintiff promised you $25,000 for your work in this case.
That's right. I was investigating the case with them. I was with the cops the whole time they were searching. So, yeah.
You haven't gotten that $25,000 yet, have you?
No, sir.
So as you sit there and testify in front of the plaintiff, you're still hoping she gives you that $25,000.
Sure.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about how the plaintiff acted when you arrived on scene, all right?
Hey, let's do it.
Now, you're a trained investigator, aren't you?
I like to say so.
Been on death investigations before?
A couple of times, yeah.
Your first thought when you saw Agatha Lee was, this is probably just a death from natural causes.
I saw an old lady dead in the bed. That's what I thought.
You know that Detective Nora Khan was on the scene as well, right?
That's right. She was the lead detective from the police.
Yeah, Detective Khan is actually the chief of the major crimes unit.
That's right.
You read her report, didn't you?
I did.
You know, Detective Khan initially thought this is probably just natural causes as well.
That's right.
But there was one person in that room who said they knew it was a murder.
Right, Miss Rogers.
That's right. The first time Stevie Rogers called you, she said, my grandmother has been murdered.
That's what she told me, yeah.
And she said that again when you arrived on scene.
Yeah, when I got up to the room and I saw her, that's what she told me.
The plaintiff knew to ask for a toxicology screen specifically, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation, speculation as for the plaintiff knew.
I'll hear you on both of those. Explain your objection.
Yes, Your Honor. There's a lack of foundation and speculation as to how this witness is able to establish what Miss Rogers' knowledge was. That she knew to ask for a toxicology report for some unknown purpose. That's not clear. There's a lack of foundation and it's speculative.
Mr. Besman?
Thank you, Your Honor. The foundation is that the plaintiff said, "I want a toxicology report." It's a rationally based perception under 701 and an opinion based on that perception that if somebody asks a question, they knew to ask that question.
I'm going to sustain this objection, but allow you to rephrase your question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Motion to strike.
I don't think there was an answer, so I'm not going to strike anything. You can continue with
So
your
Thank you, Your Honor. So the plaintiff specifically asked for a toxicology report to be made, right?
Right. She wanted all the tests done, autopsy, toxicology, all of it.
Now, at this point in time, none of those tests had come back, had they?
At what point?
When you were there for the first time at Agatha Lee's estate, none of those tests had come back, had they?
No, sir, we hadn't done them yet. We just found the body.
But the plaintiff specifically told the police, make sure you take a picture of Agatha Lee's pill organizer. Isn't that true?
Right, yeah.
But sir, despite all that, you think it's the forensic evidence that points to Drew Mars.
I think there's a lot of things that points to Drew Mars.
Sir, you talked on direct examination about some forensic evidence, right?
I did, yeah.
You talked about a black bag,
I did, yeah.
bottle of pills inside that bag.
Right.
Sir, have you ever heard the term planting evidence before?
Yeah, of course.
You know, that's something that happens sometimes, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
If somebody put a murder weapon into somebody else's bag, that would be an example of planting evidence, right?
Sure.
As an investigator, it's important that you rule that out before you accuse somebody of murder.
That's correct, right.
But you couldn't rule out planting evidence in this case. Isn't that right?
I didn't think there was no planting evidence, no, sir.
But you couldn't rule it out, could you?
What do you mean?
Well, let's talk about the evidence. So you told us that there was a fingerprint on the zipper of that black bag, right?
Right. It was a partial print. It matched the Miss Mars.
That's right. It's just a partial, isn't it?
Right.
And you know, there were other unusable fingerprints all over that bag. Isn't that true?
That's true. We found unusable prints all over, on the bag, on the pills, but the only usable one we found was on that zipper.
Well, let's stay with the bag for now.
So-
Obviously, if the prints are unusable, you can't tell us who they belong to.
Right. Can't use what's unusable.
That's right. And inside the bag, you said you tested that bottle of pills too, right?
That's right. They came back to be chlorandramine.
Well, you tested the outside for fingerprints. Isn't that true?
That's true.
Again, it was just unusable prints.
That's right.
You can't tell us that those fingerprints would match to Drew Mars.
I got no idea whose those fingerprints was. No.
You can't tell us if those fingerprints would match to Stevie Rogers.
Like I said, I got no idea.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Was there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead and
May I
proceed.
begin?
Yes.
Mr. Bond, opposing counsel asked you about planting evidence.
Right.
Did you find any evidence suggesting that evidence was planted in this case?
No, I searched the whole house. I was with the police. We didn't find nothing about any planted evidence.
Opposing counsel also asked you about when this toxicology screening and autopsy report, when they were performed.
Right.
Can you tell us if they were performed before or after the will reading where the defendant said she had no idea she'd be receiving the will?
They was performed right after.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Is there any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
May the witness please be excused?
Yes, the witness is excused.
Thank you.
Any further evidence from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests and requests a 5-minute recess.
Is that amenable to the defense?
Fine with us, Your Honor.
Great, so we will take a 5-minute recess. I have that the time is 12:03, so we will start promptly at 12:08. Let's just see. I'm supposed to say this. We will now take our 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that the video is being publicly broadcast via YouTube live stream. See you all shortly.
You're pretty good.
I can't tell if we're in the breakout room.
We're not.
I'm
We're
here,
not
just
in
so
the
you guys know.
breakout.
Yeah,
Okay.
when I checked with bailiff, the coordinator, she said to leave you all the judges in. Do we have any?
There are still competitors in the main room.
Yes, that's what I'm just looking. I sent them all to their breakout rooms. Just one moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I in the wrong breakout room right now?
We're not in breakout
okay.
rooms yet.
Oh, okay.
I sent you there, but something happened. Please give me a moment to send you to your breakout rooms. Are all the competitors out of the main room?
Is the bailiff here?
Yes, I sent you to your room. Why aren't
Yeah,
you there?
One of our team members got kicked out, so I just want to tell you.
Okay, I will work on getting them admitted.
Can you send me back? I'm sorry. Oh, hi.
I'm sorry about that. I got kicked out.
Yep, working on getting you guys in your breakout rooms again.
Thank you.
Oh, Jesus. I apologize. I cannot get you all moved. I'm still working on it.
No worries. We appreciate it.
I am actually showing you all supposed to be in a room. Did you click to accept to moving into that room?
I just saw it. There's a button on the bottom right and it says join breakout room. So I'm just going to click that.
Okay. Please do. I am now showing that all the participants are in their breakout rooms.
Okay, I know that some of them got there a little late, so I
Yeah.
want to, even though we're supposed to be back from break, I think we should give them a couple of minutes to get back.
And I'm also supposed to check and make sure all of our judges are back.
Okay.
My script says if all the judges could turn on their video a minute so I can verify that you're, I guess, there. Thank you.
Hello.
It looks like we have everybody. So whenever, Judge, whenever you want me to send a broadcast and bring them back, I will.
Why don't we give them one more minute since they kind of all
Sure.
just...
Thank you.
All right, I think we should get them back just so we don't have an all loss problem.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I sent a broadcast message and now I'm closing the rooms.
Are all the students back? I'm seeing head nodding. What about from the defense? If one of the attorneys can let me know. Perfect. All right.
Yes.
So we will, everyone's back and ready to go. Defense, please call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Drew Mars. May I proceed?
You may.
Can you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Drew Mars.
Do you know why you're here today?
Yes, I'm here because Stevie Rogers is accusing me of killing Agatha Lee.
Did you?
No, absolutely not. I could never even imagine doing something like that. Agatha meant the world to me.
I want the jury to understand that relationship. When did you first meet Miss Lee?
Back in 2008. I was actually in college for nursing and I was hired as Agatha's assistant caretaker. Right after I graduated, I was hired on as her full-time caretaker.
Did you live with her?
Yeah, I did. I lived with her in Lee Manor for the 10 years that I took care of her.
What was a typical day in your job like?
Well, I would prepare her medications. I checked her health every day, you know, things that a typical nurse would do. And then I'd also do other things like cook, clean, just whatever needed to be done around the house, really.
How was your relationship with Agatha?
Well, you know, even though technically it was my job to take care of her, I always kind of felt like she was taking care of me too. We grew so close over those 10 years and she really became a role model and a mentor to me.
Did you spend a lot of time with her?
Oh yeah. Agatha and I always joked that we didn't really have any friends our own age, but hey, that was fine with us. We would talk, read, watch movies. We watched Wheel of Fortune almost every night without fail. It was a lot of fun and I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else, really.
You mentioned that you live with Miss Lee. Did you live in her house for free?
Yeah, I did.
Were you compensated any other way?
Yeah, Agatha had actually paid for my nursing classes when I finished up school. And then she started paying me a salary. And my last year working with Agatha, I was making about $80,000 a year.
Were you comfortable with that salary?
Oh, definitely. Agatha was really generous. I never felt like I needed anything else.
So did you ever talk to Miss Lee about money?
Not really. The only time I remember anything about money coming up was when she showed me her will back in 2018.
What did you understand that will to mean?
That when Agatha passed away, I would get everything that she owned.
How'd you react?
Well, of course I was grateful, but the thought of having tens of millions of dollars was honestly kind of overwhelming. So I just tried to keep living as normally as I possibly could after I found out.
Did that ever change?
Yeah, things definitely changed when Stevie came to Lee Manor.
Who's Stevie?
Stevie is Agatha's granddaughter.
When did you first meet her?
Back in 2008, actually. She had stayed with Agatha for about a month over the summer.
When was the next time you heard from Stevie?
10 years later, she showed up at Lee Manor on July 4th of 2018.
How did Agatha react when Stevie showed up?
She seemed completely floored. I mean, she was speechless.
Did Stevie ever tell you why she came to visit?
No, she never gave a reason.
Well, how long did she stay?
Weeks. She was there until long after Agatha passed away.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about Miss Lee's will. Were you in court today when the plaintiff testified about a conversation she had with Miss Lee on August 14th?
Yeah. Yeah, I heard Stevie claim that Agatha had told her that she was putting Stevie back into the will.
Did you ever hear Agatha say she was going to do that?
No, definitely not. I actually heard Agatha say the exact opposite of that same day.
What do you mean?
Well, I was coming to Agatha's room to give some tea to her when I heard her and Stevie talking about her will.
What did you hear?
I heard Stevie say, "I know you cut me out of the will, but I really hope you'll reconsider because I've shown myself to be devoted to you."
What happened next?
Well, after Agatha said no, they both walked
panicky
in.
because I can't find this document.
What that was.
I'm sorry?
I don't know what that was, but please feel free to continue.
Yes,
Thank you, Your Honor. You were telling us
Yes,
what happened
the
after.
presider, Oli.
Who's speaking? First, whoever's taking time on both teams, please stop the time. And then who is speaking?
I believe it's the bailiff, Your Honor.
That didn't.
Oh, I am terribly sorry.
Okay. We can restart the time. Go ahead and continue your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, you were telling us what happened after Agatha declined Stevie's request. Were you finished with your answer?
I was just saying that after Agatha said that she wouldn't be giving her possessions to Stevie, they walked into the sitting area together and Agatha started heading to lunch with her friend. And then after she started going downstairs.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation. My apologies. The microphone wouldn't unmute.
I could tell you were trying to speak. So your objection was to lack of foundation. Explain your objection.
Yes, Your Honor, specifically a lack of foundation to Agatha declining to give Stevie any of her possessions. There's testimony on the record from this witness. She declined to put her back in the will, but there is not testimony on the record from this witness or anyone else stating that Agatha declined to give Stevie any of her possessions. That foundation hasn't been laid, and she's testifying as if it has.
I'll hear you.
May I
Mr.
respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, that's the same thing as saying she's not putting her back into the will. If there's a disagreement about exactly what those words mean, then that's a matter for either cross-examination or the jury's interpretation. But there's enough foundation for admissibility.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Well, go ahead and have the last word. It's your objection.
Your Honor, those words do not mean the same thing. I'm not giving you any of my possessions means I'm not giving you anything ever. I'm not putting you back into my will just means I'm not giving you anything after I die. Those are distinctly different.
I'm going to overrule the objection. If it goes a little too far into other areas, then please feel free to re-raise the objection, but it's overruled for now.
So, ma'am, what happened after Agatha made those statements?
Yeah, so Agatha started heading downstairs after that conversation, but Stevie stayed upstairs and she was just glaring at me.
Did she say anything?
Yeah, she looked me dead in the eye and she said, "Don't count your millions yet."
Miss Mars, what day did all of this happen?
It was on August 14th, the day that Agatha passed.
Now, you said earlier you drove Agatha to lunch after that conversation. Do you know when she came back?
Around 2 p.m.
Who was there when you got back?
It was just me, Stevie, and Agatha.
What did you and Agatha do?
Well, Agatha took a nap when we got home, but I went into her room around 6:30 to give her some dinner. I just asked her how she was doing and how her day was. But that was actually the last time I saw her alive. I wish I would have said more to her.
What happened the next morning?
I woke up around 7 a.m. to get an early morning walk in. And then I got home and I started brewing some orange tea. It was Agatha's favorite kind. So I went upstairs to her room to give it to her. And normally when I opened the door, Agatha would say something like, "Good morning," or "How are you?" But there was nothing this time. So I knew right away that something was off.
What happened next?
I went up to Agatha's bed and I put my hand on her shoulder. I started kind of tapping her and seeing if she would move, but she didn't. So I checked her pulse and there was nothing. That's when I realized she was gone. I couldn't believe it.
What did you do?
The first thing I did was run into Stevie's room and tell her. I could barely get it out. I was shocked.
What did Stevie do?
Within seconds of me coming in there, she called the police and a private investigator. And then minutes later, they were at the house and Stevie was saying that Agatha's death was a murder. It just all happened so fast.
What happened next?
A few days later, we had to come back to Lee Manor so that Agatha's lawyer could read her will.
How did you react when the will was read, saying that you would be the inheritor?
I said that I had no idea.
Was that true?
No, I knew it was in the will.
Well, if you knew what was in the will, then why did you say you had no idea?
I didn't want it to look like I had some sort of motive to kill Agatha. I mean, Stevie had just hired a private investigator. I could tell what she was doing. I was terrified. I felt like I was being framed. So I tried to do the only thing I could do to stop it.
Did it work?
No. No, I was arrested for killing Agatha the very next day. I can't even comprehend doing something like that.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Cross-examination?
Do you need a moment, Ms. Mars?
I'm okay, thank you.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Bartley.
Of course. First, can everyone hear and see me all right?
Yes.
Ms. Mars, I want to pick up right where you left off by talking about how you lied to avoid suspicion in this case. On the day before you were arrested, you were present at a will reading, right?
Yeah.
At this will reading, it was announced that you were Agatha Lee's sole heir, right?
Yes.
Now, as you said earlier, you'd already been shown that will, right?
Yeah.
You knew that you were her sole heir.
That's right.
But then at this will reading, you said repeatedly that you did not know, correct?
Yeah.
At this will reading, you said repeatedly that you couldn't believe it, yes or no?
Yeah.
To be clear, ma'am, these were lies.
Yeah.
You lied at this will reading because you did not want the police to investigate you for Agatha Lee's murder. Yes or no?
I didn't want them to suspect me. I saw what Stevie was doing. I felt like I was being framed, so I tried to do what I could.
Ma'am, to be clear, you didn't want the police to suspect you, so you lied. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Then with that in mind, I want to talk about what you know about Agatha Lee's health conditions. You were her
Okay.
caretaker for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
In those 10 years, you became aware of all of her medical conditions, didn't you?
That's right.
You knew that she had had a heart attack in 2008 that was nearly fatal.
Yes, it was from chlorandramine.
That's right. It was from a single pill of the drug called chlorandramine.
Yes.
Now, you're aware of what chlorandramine looks like, right?
Of course.
And in 2018, Agatha Lee was taking an arthritis medication called Winterin, right?
That's right.
You're aware of what Winterin looks like as well.
Yeah, it looks exactly the same as chlorandramine.
Ma'am, it doesn't just look exactly the same, it weighs exactly the same too, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're pretty much identical. That's why we made sure never to keep chlorandramine in the house.
Ma'am, in your own words, chlorandramine and Winterin, you know them to be practically indistinguishable. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Ma'am, with that in mind, I want to lay out a timeline of the events of the day of Agatha Lee's death. Now,
Okay.
as you said on direct examination, you've been here throughout this whole trial, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, you heard Miss Rogers testifying about a conversation she had with Miss Lee on August 14th.
Yes.
You know that Miss Rogers said that this conversation took place in the study,
Yeah.
and that in this conversation, Agatha Lee said she'd be willing everything to Stevie, right?
That's what I heard Stevie say, but that is not what happened.
Well, you can confirm for us that on August 14th, they did have a conversation in the study, right?
Yeah.
And immediately after that conversation, Agatha Lee asked you to drive her to lunch, didn't she?
Yes.
While you were driving her to lunch, she placed a phone call, didn't she?
Yeah, to someone named Kirby.
Now, ma'am, you've met only one Kirby, right?
Yeah.
You know that Agatha Lee's attorney is named Kirby Doolin.
That's right.
That's the Kirby you've met?
Yeah.
On this phone call during that drive, Agatha Lee said that she wanted to make an appointment with Kirby for later that week, didn't she?
Yeah, I just heard her on the phone with someone named Kirby. I don't know for sure if it was her attorney, but she said that she wanted to make an appointment. That's right.
Now, after this telephone conversation you overheard, you dropped her off at her lunch, right?
Yep.
That's when you went to a pharmacy. Isn't that right, ma'am?
Yeah.
Now, ma'am, you're aware chloroandramine, that drug we've been talking about, it's an over-the-counter drug.
Yeah.
At this pharmacy, you can't tell us exactly what you purchased, can you?
I just bought some toiletries for myself.
Ma'am, was that a yes or a no?
I don't remember exactly. It was 2 years ago.
You didn't keep a receipt of the items that you purchased there?
No.
And you paid in cash at this pharmacy, right?
Yeah, I almost always pay in cash.
Ms. Mars, Agatha Lee died less than 24 hours later. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Less than 24 hours after you paid in cash at this pharmacy, Agatha Lee was dead from a lethal dose of the over-the-counter drug chloroandramine. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. Your Honor, nothing further.
Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor. May the witness be excused.
The witness is excused.
Thank you.
Defense. Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Mr. Ryan Cabrera to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, how you doing? I'm Ryan Romano Cabrera, but my friends call me Cabby. Miss Driscoll, feel free.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an investigator into and a commentator on the lives of the rich and famous.
Well, how'd you get into that kind of work?
Well, I guess you could say it's kind of a family business. You see, my uncle Chichi was Joe Pesci's stunt double and my cousin Vinny. Initially, I tried my hand at the whole acting thing, but the charade got a little old.
What do you mean?
Wise guy number 17 in Goodfellas, pizzeria purveyor number 42 in The Sopranos. I wasn't exactly getting the same calls as Al Pacino. I thought being a biographer would allow me to live vicariously through the famous, just enough to not hate my life. So here we are.
So who have you written biographies about?
Let's see, Pancho Villa, Josh Groban, the cast of The Brady Bunch, and Agatha Lee.
I want to talk about that last person you mentioned, Agatha Lee. When did you start working with her?
Well, I started gunning for that story in 2015. You see, Aggie, that's what I called her, she was quite the enigma. She wrote a mystery bigger than Scooby-Doo, then just kind of went reclusive. After 3 years of email pestering, Aggie bit the bait and we started having sit-downs to discuss her life and work.
What was your work with Miss Lee like?
Well, it started more as interviewing, but pretty quickly just turned to really delightful conversation. We would have milk and cookies and chat a few times a week.
Where did the two of you usually meet?
Usually it was at Aggie's humongo house in Midlands. They called it Lee Manor.
When you were at Lee Manor, did you see anyone else there?
Yeah, it was only a couple of folks, Drew Mars and Stevie Rogers.
Let's start with Drew Mars. Who was she?
Miss Mars was a live-in nurse and daily companion of Aggie's for many years.
In the time you spent at Lee Manor, what did you observe about the relationship between Drew Mars and Agatha Lee?
I mean, it was like Madonna with a mirror. The two of them were inseparable. Drew was always taking care of Aggie when I was around. It was really more like a grandparental relationship to my eyes.
And let's talk about Stevie Rogers. Who was she?
Yeah, technically speaking, Stevie was Aggie's granddaughter.
Well, did Miss Lee ever talk to you about Miss Rogers?
Indeed, she did.
What did she say?
I mean, it broke my itty bitty heart. Aggie said Stevie never called, never wrote, never visited. Stevie was her only living family. I can't imagine.
Did Miss Lee tell you how that made her feel?
Yeah, she said she felt abandoned. I mean, it really broke her up. Aggie actually told me she planned to change her will because of it.
Oh, did you ever see that will?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Bessman, could we get what's been admitted as Exhibit 9 on the screen? Now, Mr. Cabrera, does this document say anything about Stevie Rogers?
Yeah,
Objection, Your Honor, needlessly cumulative. May I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Your Honor, this will has already been entered into evidence during the direct examination of Stevie Rogers. For this witness, Mr. Cabrera, who is uninvolved with this will and has no relation to it, would be needlessly cumulative. It's our good faith belief that he won't be able to add anything beyond just relaying the contents of the will, which has already been entered into evidence.
I'll hear you, Ms. Driscoll.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll only be asking this witness a couple of questions about the contents of the will. He's only going to be highlighting very relevant parts of this document to the members of the jury. Now, that's probative, and it's certainly not needlessly cumulative.
Yeah, I agree. If it ends up going further than a few questions or beyond this witness's knowledge, please re-raise an objection, but it's over.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, Mr. Cabrera, does this will mention Stevie Rogers' name?
Yeah, it says, I specifically intend to exclude my grandchild, Stevie Rogers, from receiving any benefit from my estate or under this will.
Does the will say who Miss Lee intended to leave her money to?
Yeah, it says Drew Mars.
Oh, Mr. Cabrera, did you ever see how Stevie Rogers interacted with Agatha Lee?
No, not really. I mean, Stevie was never around till around a month before Aggie bit the dust.
After Mr. Rogers returned, did you ever talk to Miss Lee about their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we were always meeting for milk and cookies. So after Stevie came around, we had a little chat about her.
And what did Miss Lee say?
Aggie seemed really down. I asked if everything was okay, and Aggie just said, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie will forgive me.
What day was that?
That was August 14th, 2018, the day before Aggie died.
Oh, the day Miss Lee died. How did it begin for you?
I mean, it was like any other Wednesday. I got my mani-pedi, I took my dog to therapy, and I soaked in some sun. It was really a very nice day until Drew called.
And what happened on that phone call?
Sounded like Drew was sopping her eyes out. I could hardly make anything out until I finally heard her say Aggie had died.
Or did you talk to Miss Mars after that phone call?
Yeah, I was at the estate for the will reading and for some of the police investigation.
Could you tell the members of the jury a little bit about what you observed from that police investigation?
Yeah, well, there were the regular old suits there, and then there was this other guy named Bond. I think he took his 007 connection a little too seriously because he wouldn't stop pacing around giving these remarks for everybody.
What do you mean, remarks?
I mean, it was like an M. Night Shyamalan script. He was crafting all these conspiracy theories about Aggie's death right off the bat. I mean, Bond accused Drew of killing Aggie before my coffee even got cold.
Objection, Your Honor. 403, substantially more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard? Oh, sorry, you're muted, Your Honor.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, Your Honor. This witness is needlessly editorializing what Mr. Bond was saying at that time. While he is free to say what he saw or what he heard, for him to editorialize it or characterize what Mr. Bond said in this way prejudices the jury. They are free to make their own judgment as they have seen Mr. Bond testify about his credibility as a witness. So this is substantially more prejudicial than it is probative.
What specific statement or testimony are you objecting to the witness saying?
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically, the phrase conspiracy theories. We have no issues with the other statements Mr. Cabrera said, just that specific portion.
Ms. Driscoll, will you explain to me why conspiracy theories should be allowed in?
Yes, Your Honor. Now that phrasing is probative to today's case. Here we have a witness who was present during the police investigation, talking about how he perceived that investigation. Now that's probative for the members of the jury to hear today, and it's certainly not substantially outweighed by the prejudicial effect. That prejudicial effect is next to nothing, considering the fact that the members of the jury are perfectly capable of determining that this is just Mr. Cabrera's way of speaking.
Ms. Nguyen, it's your objection. Could you just explain to me how it is substantially more prejudicial than it is probative?
Yes, Your Honor. There's no probative value to Mr. Cabrera's opinion on Mr. Bond's investigation, as he's not part of the investigation. He's not a detective. He's just a person who happened to be there. And for the reason why it's substantially more prejudicial than it is probative, this witness is just needlessly characterizing Mr. Bond. The members of the jury have already heard Mr. Bond testify, and while he can talk about other things, but to phrase it as conspiracy theories is prejudicial, substantially more prejudicial.
I'm going to allow it in. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. You mentioned, Mr. Cabrera, that Mr. Bond accused Drew Mars of murder. What day was that?
That was August 22nd.
And when did the police arrest Miss Mars?
It was the very next day.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. I have nothing further at this time.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor, just one moment to reposition.
Perfectly fine.
Can you hear me all right, Your Honor?
I can.
May I begin?
May.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, on direct examination, Ms. Driscoll just asked you about some remarks you said that you heard Mr. Bond making. Just to be clear, you didn't say those remarks on the day Agatha Lee died, right?
No, it was right when he arrived on the scene, though. So I thought, man, this is a little wacky.
But Mr. Cabrera, you'd agree with me that was a week after Agatha Lee died?
Yeah, that's true.
Now I'm talking about something else you mentioned on direct examination. You remember mentioning that lunch you had with your friend Aggie?
Yeah.
And during this lunch, you remember asking her if you can go out to lunch with her again that Friday?
Yeah, we were on a 3-day rotation. That was about standard for us.
But she told you no.
Yeah, she was busy.
She was busy because she was planning on meeting with her attorney, right?
Yes, Kirby Doolittle, Midland's finest. He bills you a couple hours just for grabbing you a cup of coffee in the waiting room.
And just to be clear, you don't know why she was planning on meeting Kirby Doolittle?
Definitely not.
So you have no idea if she was planning on making changes to her will?
As you said, I don't know.
So you don't know if she was planning on changing her will back to Stevie Rogers, right?
Oh, man, that'd be a kick in the head. Stevie never visiting or calling and just begging for money. I don't know if Aggie would do that, but yeah, I don't know.
Mr. Cabrera, I didn't ask you about Stevie Rogers' relationship with your grandma. Just a yes or no. You have no idea if she was making changes to her will. Yes or no?
Yeah, I don't know. You're right.
Now let's talk about why you're here. You'd agree with me that you have a lot to gain from the outcome of this trial?
I don't know what you mean.
You made a deal with the defendant before you came here, right?
No, I didn't make no deals. I mean, I was asked to testify and I said, sure.
And after you agreed to testify for the defendant, she offered you whatever you wanted from Agatha Lee's estate, right?
Yeah, Drew was trying to declutter the place, I think. It was a close call, honestly, between Aggie's collection of president-themed gnomes and some of her books.
Mr. Cabrera, I didn't ask you about what you think Drew Mars was planning on doing. I just asked whether or not she let you take your pick from anything from Agatha Lee's estate. Yes or no?
Yeah, she said I could take a look and see if there was anything I wanted.
And you mentioned that private book collection. That was the thing you chose, right?
Yeah, that's what I was most interested in.
And you're aware that these books could be worth a lot of money?
I mean, sure, Death in a Bottle was quite a hit.
Yeah, Death in a Bottle. That's Agatha Lee's first book, right?
Yeah, like I said, bigger than Scooby-Doo.
It sold over 65 million copies.
Yes, I'm hoping for a similar fate for my debut romance novel.
And you're also hoping that these books would also make you a lot of money?
I mean, I guess I could include the information in my biography, and it might be a little bit further with the details, if that's what you mean.
I didn't mention your biography, Mr. Cabrera. My question was about whether you think these books would be a lot of money.
Well, yeah, I mean, Aggie's only other book was a big hit, so I would guess that it'd be successful.
And this book collection, just to be clear, it included unpublished books by Agatha Lee, right?
Yeah.
And for these books, you only get them if the defendant wins this trial, right?
I don't know. I think Stevie would let me take a look too. It might help Aggie's biography after all.
I didn't ask about Stevie or your biography. I just asked whether or not you only get these books if the defendant wins this trial.
Yeah, and I'm saying I don't think that's true. I think Stevie would let me take a look.
Mr. Cabrera, redirecting you back to my question. You only get those books if the defendant wins this trial. Yes or no?
Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I mean, I know Drew's going to let me take a look if she has access to the books.
You said that the defendant will let you take a look, but isn't it true that she would actually let you own these books?
Yeah, I mean, probably. Drew never really seemed too interested in Aggie's literary prestige.
And she told you if she was still in possession of Agatha Lee's estate after this trial's over, you'd get them, right?
Yeah.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Is there any redirect?
No to redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that Mr. Cabrera be excused.
The witness is excused.
And at this time, Your Honor, the defense rests its case and we are able to move into closing arguments.
Yes, plaintiff, are you also prepared to proceed? I think we're running a little tight on time.
Yes, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed. Just give me a moment to
Can we
pull a few things up.
just clarify, sorry, and get on the same page about timing, just so we know that we have the same word? Yeah.
Do the two timekeepers want to confer?
Yeah, that would be great. I'm timing for a plaintiff if the defense timekeeper could. Is anybody keeping time for defense?
Sorry, we have two people keeping time. It looks like all losses at 1:08. So with 9-minute closings, that seems like it would be all right.
Okay, we could do that. I had specific times for each person, but we can run 9 minutes. Brennan, do you have an issue with that?
No issue.
Okay, 9 minutes.
And feel free to speak further on the time in the group chat, but I want to not take any more time.
Yeah, no worries. Just I had 8 minutes and 20 seconds for the defense closing, and I had 9 minutes and 44 seconds for our closing, for plaintiff closing.
I can confirm that.
Okay, perfect. So those are the times that we'll go with. If everyone judges, if you'll please switch to speaker view, and we will now have closing arguments from each party.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
May.
The moment that Agatha Lee told Stevie Rogers that she was back in the will, Lee signed her own death warrant. Because she didn't know who was outside that door listening to that conversation. She didn't know the defendant heard her say that she'd be giving her granddaughter everything and leaving the defendant with nothing. When the defendant heard that, the defendant knew she had to do something before she lost everything. Agatha Lee had to die, and the defendant had to kill her. That's why we filed suit in court today. You see, in Midlands, we've got something called the Slayer statute, which simply means that if you kill someone, you can't inherit their money. It goes to their next of kin. Now, everyone agrees at the time of Lee's death, the heir in the listed will was the defendant. To prove our case today, we had to prove that the defendant knowingly or purposefully caused Agatha Lee's death. We had to do that to a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means that it's more likely than not true. We've met our burden today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to walk you through how we met our burden by talking to you about what the defendant knew, what she did, and the evidence that she left behind. Now, I also want to address something right up front. The defense, they don't have any burden here today. But at the start of this trial, Ms. Driscoll, she came up here and she made you a promise during their opening statement. She promised that the evidence would point not just to her client's innocence, but would point to the plaintiff's guilt, to Ms. Rogers' guilt, saying that she was the true murderer. She asked you to take a closer look at the evidence. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a closer look at the defense's evidence, and we're going to see that what it shows is that the defendant is the one who had to do something before she lost everything. But let's start with that first of those three topics I told you about, what the defendant knew. Now, as we heard on the morning of August 14th, the defendant overheard a conversation between Ms. Rogers and Agatha Lee, where Agatha Lee promised that she'd be receiving the inheritance, that would all go to the plaintiff. Now, the defendant, they tried to tell you something else. They tried to tell you that didn't happen. The conversation was different. But we know that's not true because of what Agatha Lee does right after. She calls her attorney. And if for some reason she wasn't changing her will, if she was leaving it all with the defendant, she wouldn't have to call her attorney. The fact that she did, the fact that both defense witnesses can confirm that's what she did, shows that Miss Rogers' story is the one that's true. And the defendant's, it just didn't cut it. But what else does the defendant know that Miss Rogers doesn't? See, the defendant knows that Agatha Lee has a fatal allergy to chloroandramine. But the defendant knows something else. The defendant knows that not only does she have that fatal allergy, but that chloroandramine looks identical to the medication that she gives Agatha Lee every day. Ms. Rogers, she doesn't know that. I mean, if you accept the defense's story, you have to believe that Ms. Rogers bought a pill not knowing how she was going to get Agatha Lee to take it, not knowing what medications Agatha Lee took, just hoping that if she left it in that room, Agatha Lee might take it and die. That doesn't make any sense. The person who knew that they could get Agatha Lee to take this pill is the defendant. And she knew she could do something before she lost everything. But what exactly did she do? Well, we heard about it. She goes to a pharmacy right after she hears that conversation with with Ms. Rogers and with Agatha Lee. Right after she hears Agatha Lee call her attorney and schedule an appointment for later that week. She knows she has very little time, so she has to act fast. So she goes to that pharmacy, a pharmacy where we know that chloroandramine is sold. It's an over-the-counter drug. She pays in cash. She conveniently loses the receipts. And then that means there's no record of her ever having purchased it. And she can get home and poison Agatha Lee with no one the wiser. But there's just one problem. She's still got to actually make the switch. How do we know that she actually made that switch? Well, we know because that's what Miss Rogers saw. Miss Rogers saw her leaving her room, walking over to Agatha Lee's room while Agatha Lee was still awake with something in her hand. That was the moment that Agatha Lee was doomed, because Agatha Lee was about to have her pills switched for ones that would save her to ones that would kill her. And that brings us to that last point. What did the defendant leave behind? Well, what the defendant left behind was the pills. The chloroandramine found in the bag with her fingerprints, found in her room. Now, what that tells us, what that shows us, is that the defendant is the one who is responsible here. But look, the only reason we're able to know that that's what that says is because we had a toxicology screening. We had an autopsy report performed. And the defense has spent this whole trial trying to tell you that because Miss Rogers asked for a tox strip, because she asked for an autopsy report, that means that she's the real killer. I want you to think about what they're saying. They're saying that the person who looks for more information, the person who wants an investigation, that person is a killer. And the person who tries to literally burn the evidence of their crime, burn Agatha Lee's body before any investigation can be performed, that person has nothing to hide. That's just not reasonable, members of the jury. That just doesn't make sense. It's because the defendant left that evidence behind that we know that she killed Agatha Lee. Now, the defendant, she came up and she tried to tell you some different story. But there's something that you have to keep in mind. Because in a few moments, after all the closings are done, the judge is going to instruct you a few things. They're going to instruct you that if you find that someone has lied about anything, you can find that they're lying about everything. Members of the jury, there's another key difference, if we look a little closer, between Miss Rogers and Miss Mars. We know the defendant lied. We know Miss Mars lied, and we know why she lied. Because she did not want an investigation. She told you as much right there on the stand. And the defense, they're going to come up here and they're going to try to present to you their evidence. So they want to take you a closer look at that shows Miss Rogers is the real killer. Here's that evidence in total. That the defendant told Rogers that Agatha Lee was vulnerable to chlorandramine. But Miss Rogers doesn't know that chlorandramine could be switched with anything. Their evidence is that Miss Rogers likes reading mystery novels, and members of the jury, if mystery novels were a cause to think someone is a killer, then you're probably going to have to lock up a lot of people, and that just simply isn't true. Their evidence is that there's not a lock on Miss Mars's door when there is no evidence anywhere that chlorandramine was actually planted in her room. That it got there by any person other than Miss Mars. And their evidence runs out. So where does that leave you, members of the jury? It leaves you with a defendant who lied. It leaves you with a defendant who knew that if they switched out Agatha's pills, they could get her to take something lethal. It's a defendant who knew that Agatha Lee was about to write her out of the will, and she just had days to act. It's a defendant who left behind a body that she couldn't get rid of fast enough, and a defendant who left behind the murder weapon in her room, in her bag. And it's because of that we're here today. And this right now, this is where you come in, members of the jury. Because when you walk back into that jury room to deliberate, you don't just take with you your common sense or what you heard in court today, you take your life experiences too. And what your life experiences show you is that there is no way that Stevie Rogers killed her grandmother, left herself completely alone in the world. That just isn't true. What those experiences tell you is that it was the defendant who killed Agatha Lee. Now, it's your chance to hold her accountable. And you may not be able to send her to jail. But what you can do is make sure she doesn't profit off of the crime she committed. So please, find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Look a little closer. When you go to buy a car, there's a reason why I always have to ask the dealer to take a test drive first. Because it doesn't matter how great that dealer's sales pitch is, you won't feel confident until you look a little closer. When you go to buy a house, there's a reason why you always have to ask the real estate agent to take a tour first. Because it doesn't matter how perfect that house looks from the outside, you won't feel comfortable until you look a little closer. When attorneys come to court and accuse a caretaker of murdering the woman she loved, there's a reason why the law places 100% of the burden on their shoulders. Because just like the car, and just like the house, you can't buy what they're selling until you look a little closer. Now, when you go back to deliberate, there are 3 things that I want you to look closely at specifically. And in each of these 3, you're going to find a plaintiff failing to meet its burden of proof again and again and again. Number 1, let's look a little closer at motive. So we know that if Stevie Rogers wins the trial, Stevie Rogers gets $20 million. If Drew Mars wins, Drew Mars gets $20 million. So that's even. But the plaintiff wants to tell you that the defendant stood to lose everything. Now, all of that comes from a conversation that Stevie Rogers alone can testify to. Stevie Rogers, and only Stevie Rogers, said that on August 14th, Agatha Lee told her she was going to put her back into the will. But then we called Drew Mars, who said she was right outside the door and heard Agatha Lee say the opposite. So now their case is a he said, she said. Then we called Ryan Cabrera, who said he spoke with Agatha Lee right after that supposedly happened. And Agatha Lee said, "I'm so sorry, I hope Stevie Rogers can forgive me." So now their case is a he said, they said. Members of the jury, that's not meeting any burden of proof. Number 2, let's look a little closer at who had the opportunity to kill Agatha Lee. So like we talked about, the plaintiff's theory is that that August 14th conversation is what sparked Drew Mars into a murderous rage. And at some point after that conversation, but before the next day, Drew Mars went into Agatha Lee's bedroom and swapped out her pill for one that would kill her. Well, there's a problem with that timeline. It's uncontested in today's case that right after that conversation, Drew Mars drove Agatha Lee to lunch. And then Drew Mars drove Agatha Lee back from lunch. Then Agatha Lee went to her room and she died the next day. There was no point in time when Drew Mars could have been alone in that room to make the swap. But do you know who was home alone that day? Well, that was Stevie Rogers. While the two of them were out, while Agatha and Miss Mars were at lunch, Miss Rogers was home alone. She had plenty of time to go swap the pills. She had plenty of time to plant the evidence in Miss Mars's closet. Number 3, let's look a little closer at Stevie Rogers. You see, members of the jury, an innocent person doesn't see an old woman who looks like she just died of natural causes and think, oh my God, this has to be a murder. But that's what this plaintiff did. It gets worse than that, though. Before any testing was done, this plaintiff said, you need to do a toxicology screen specifically. She said that because she admitted she already knew it was a poisoning, not a heart attack, not any other kind of natural causes death, not any other kind of murder. She knew it was a poisoning. Then she told the detectives to take a picture specifically of the pill organizer. Let's take a step out of the plaintiff's world, because we know where this story comes from. You're going to get a chance to read it. Because we learned that while the plaintiff was making all these allegations, while Agatha Lee was being poisoned, the plaintiff was reading a book where the caretaker is accused of poisoning a wealthy older person with chloroandramine. Members of the jury, the plaintiff on the stand said, it's funny how history repeats itself. What a thing to say. The plaintiff is asking you to believe it's all a coincidence. It's a coincidence that she was reading a book where the murder weapon is chloroandramine and her grandmother was found poisoned by chloroandramine, the same exact drug that you've probably never heard of before today. It's a coincidence that she accuses and frames the caretaker, the exact person accused in that book. Of course not, members of the jury. The plaintiff got her plan from that book. She was trying to recreate her grandmother's famous mystery novel. But here's the thing. You know the saying, the sequel is never as good as the original? Well, that's true here. Now, I've never read Agatha Lee's book. I'm sure it was great. Sold a lot of copies. We know that, so it must have been a great mystery. But the plaintiff's story doesn't really hold up. A good mystery should at least have two people who had time to commit the crime. A good mystery should at least have two people who are acting innocent at the beginning. Here we don't have that. There's one person who knew how this crime was committed because there's one person who committed this crime, and that was Stevie Rogers herself. Members of the jury, her story's bad. Her case is even worse. Find Drew Mars not liable. Thank you.
Is there time or is it permitted for a rebuttal?
I just
I don't believe there's time.
I messed up timing, I'm sorry, but the defense says, I believe 45 seconds, is that right?
I think we're interested in the plaintiff's time.
I meant the plaintiff, excuse me.
Okay, if I have 45 seconds, then I will take it. May I begin?
May.
Defense counsel got up here and started talking about a good mystery story. And you're right, a good mystery story has two people who could possibly be the suspects. But unfortunately, this isn't a good mystery story because there's only one person who knew they could switch the pills. Only one person who tried to have the body cremated immediately after, destroying all the evidence. Only one person who kept a bottle of chlorantramine pills in their room. And look, let's just address something the defense said. They said that Agatha Lee was in her room the whole night after she got home from that lunch. We know that isn't true. That was never in court today. That's just not true. The defendant had access so she could do something before she lost everything. So find her liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. The judges should be filling out their ballots, and will the bailiff let us know when we are no longer on the live stream?